This is Origin Stories, the Leaky Foundation podcast. I'm Meredith Johnson. The 2016 Euro soccer games ended just a few weeks ago. And in case you weren't following it, Portugal beat France. There's this video from that game that went viral. In it, you see a guy who's crying because France just lost the finals. And all of a sudden, a little boy comes up to him. The boy is wearing a shirt for the Portuguese team. It seems like they're strangers. The boy notices the man is upset and touches his wrist. And then they shake hands. The boy pats the man on the back, and then the man gives the boy this huge bear hug. It's like in an instant, this fan who was so upset is totally changed. He gives the boy a thumbs up, and they walk away. If you follow Frans de Waal on Facebook, you'll know that he watches videos like this too.
These things get extremely emotional. You see all these fans hugging each other.
Frans de Waal is a primatologist at Emory University. For him, the kind of behavior you see with the sports fans in this video, with the people hugging and consoling each other, is actually a window into something else. It's a way of looking at empathy.
Empathy is that you're sensitive to the emotions of others. You sometimes match them, so if someone is afraid, you're going to be afraid. If someone is sad, you're going to be sad. Empathy is by itself not necessarily a positive characteristic. It's an ability to be affected by the emotions and the situation of somebody else.
And humans, we're so easily affected by the emotions of others that we feel for the people in that video, even if we'll never meet them and we don't care about soccer at all. Behaviors like empathy and cooperation are key features of humans. Our species' success has depended on traits like empathy and the ability to cooperate. Empathy is something scientists used to think was unique to us. But early on in his career, Frans de Waal was doing research on chimpanzees, and he noticed that sometimes after a fight, the chimp who lost the fight would be comforted by other chimps.
Who then touch or groom or embrace and show calming behavior towards the other. And I call that consolation behavior.
As a young scientist, Frans de Waal didn't pay consolation behavior much mind at first.
For the longest time, I sort of ignored that. I didn't do much with those observations. I reported them, but that's about all.
But then he went to a conference with some child psychologists who were studying empathy in children. They were talking about how kids as young as 1 or 2 would stroke the face of someone who was upset. The psychologists called this behavior empathic concern.
And I said, well, if that's what you classify as empathy, then I see a lot of empathy, because basically what they were describing was consolation behavior.
These days, thanks in part to Frans de Waal's research, animal empathy is something that a lot of scientists are taking seriously.
But at the time, that was sort of revolutionary to call it empathy, because people had never used that word for what animals do.
Scientists have looked at empathy in all sorts of animals: monkeys, chimps, bonobos, elephants, birds, dogs, even rats. For de Waal, seeing empathy in so many animals, especially in our close cousins like chimps and bonobos, suggests that empathy has its roots deep in our own evolutionary history as humans. And it turns out that humans may not be the only ones with a special ability for empathy. Producer Nancy Rosenbaum has the rest of our story.
That's right, we're not so special. A lot of mammals show empathy, and in their own unique ways.
The chimps embrace and kiss, and elephants, they cannot do that kind of thing. They stick a trunk into the mouth of somebody else, or they rumble. They have deep rumbling sounds that are reassuring to each other.
But there's one empathic animal in particular that Frans de Waal has spent a lot of time looking at: the bonobo. For a long time, scientists thought that chimps were our closest ancestral relatives. But it turns out that bonobos are just as close to us. We share 99% of our DNA with them.
A bonobo is a sort of elegant version of the chimpanzee. You know, a chimpanzee has a very thick neck and very big shoulders, and especially the males, they're really built like a bodybuilder, and they're extremely strong animals. And a bonobo is much more elegant.
Scientists study chimps in order to better understand human behavior and evolution. But the thing about chimps is that they can be pretty violent.
And so many scientists, they flock to the chimpanzee, and the chimpanzee is very dominance-oriented and very violent, at least between communities. And that's why we have all these scenarios in anthropology about how our ancestors were violent and had lots of warfare, and that's how we became so successful by eliminating groups like the Neanderthals and so on.
Unlike chimps, bonobo societies are dominated by females. And they're basically hippies. In a study led by University of Minnesota primatologist Michael Wilson a few years ago, researchers observed 152 cases of chimps killing each other in fights. But with the bonobos, there was only one suspected case.
Which gives you a little bit of an indication that the bonobos are a far more peaceful species. And I think for the anthropologists, it is a wonderful occasion to see a different side of the human species also, if you look at bonobos. Because bonobos have a lot of peacemaking skills and empathy skills that have been neglected in scenarios of human evolution.
And those peacemaking skills, they give bonobos an emotional edge over other apes.
Bonobos are more sensitive, I think, to the emotions of others. This has been known for a long time since it's such a sexy species.
Did you say it's a sexy species?
Yeah, it's a species that has, instead of fighting with each other, they resolve conflicts with sex.
All of this makes bonobos a really good species for studying empathy. Tucked away in a tropical forest in Central Africa, there's a bonobo sanctuary. Frans de Waal and his research partners have been studying bonobos here for over a decade. Many of the bonobos who live here are orphans, whose parents were killed by bushmeat hunters.
It's perfect observation conditions. But of course, the drawback is that these are traumatized orphans, and we know from human studies that orphans who are not raised with a lot of love and affection, they don't develop a lot of empathy.
Eventually, these orphan bonobos in the sanctuary grow up, and they have their own children. De Waal has compared consolation behavior in the orphan bonobos with bonobos who've been raised by their own moms.
We looked at after an incident where, let's say, one bonobo is attacked by another one and has lost, how long do they scream? And you have some bonobos who scream for 2 seconds and then it's over. And you have others who scream for 3 minutes. Now, 3 minutes is a very long time to scream, given how much voice they put into their screaming.
The reason De Waal looked at how long the bonobos screamed is because screaming is actually a clue into something else, something important. Humans have it too. De Waal calls it emotional regulation. A good example of this in humans is when a toddler falls down and scrapes their knee on the sidewalk. With some kids, they easily shake it off with a little hug or a kiss. But other kids, they totally lose it and they can't stop crying.
And what we found in the study is that there was a very good correlation between consolation behavior. So how much do you console others who are in distress versus how good you are at regulating your own emotions, which is a connection that has been found in human children as well.
So do you mean that the bonobos that were more likely to console were also better at regulating their own emotions when they were upset?
Yeah, that's exactly what we found. And the reason that this connection exists is that, let's say, if I'm watching someone who's distressed, I will get distressed myself.
Right.
But in order to then provide help, I need to get over my own distress.
When it comes to humans, De Waal says that children who have a hard time getting over their distress have lower levels of empathy. He found something similar with the bonobos. The bonobos who were raised by their moms didn't scream as long when they were upset. They were better at emotional regulation than the orphan bonobos. And the bonobos whose meltdowns were shorter, the ones who got over their bonobo boo-boos quickly, they were the ones who were also more likely to console another bonobo. But parenting wasn't the only thing that predicted consolation behavior in the bonobos. It turns out that age matters too, but not in the older is wiser sense.
In the human literature, they say that we become more empathic with age. So that adults, for example, have more empathy than children. I've always doubted that.
The reason for De Waal's doubt is that the adult studies on empathy, they're usually based on self-reports, whereas the studies on kids, those are based on observation.
I'm a very big skeptic on self-report. I think people lie all the time, and I'm so happy I work with species that don't do self-reports very well. And so I'm very distrustful. And what we found was exactly the opposite. We found that the young bonobos were more empathic than the adults. And I think the adults, they become more selective. That doesn't mean that they don't have a lot of empathy, but they react to others in a more selective way than the young ones, who get upset very quickly by things that happen around them.
When it comes to empathy, Dewall has seen differences across the sexes, and not just with bonobos.
All the studies that I know on animals, on rats and elephants and apes, the females show more empathy than the males.
But age and sex aside, the biggest predictor of empathy is something else entirely.
Well, the main factor, and this is found in all the studies on all the animals, is how close they are to the other individual.
So whether we're a mouse or a human being, we're more likely to show empathy to someone we're familiar with.
And this, of course, has a flip side, is that we have trouble having empathy for individuals who are different from us or who are more distant from us. And so this is a universal, also in human studies, is that empathy is very biased.
When we say that someone is empathic, we usually mean it as a compliment. But as Dewall sees it, empathy isn't all sunshine and rainbows.
You can also use empathy to screw somebody. You can use empathy. Someone who sells you a car for a price that is too high, for example, is going to be very empathic towards you as long as the deal is being made, and then you drive off, and then the empathy is gone probably. So empathy can be used to manipulate others. Empathy is by itself not necessarily a positive characteristic. It's an ability.
Consolation is just one way that Dewall has investigated empathy in animals. He's also looked at another kind of behavior, something that might not seem like it has anything to do with empathy.
People yawn when other people yawn, and we know that that is related to empathy. It is based on the same sort of motor mechanism, and it also correlates. People who are very sensitive to the yawns of others, they are the ones who are very high on empathy.
When someone catches a yawn from someone else, scientists call that yawn contagion. Dewall decided to test yawn contagion in chimpanzees. He did that by showing them videos of other yawning chimps.
And if you show them videos of chimps that they know, you see that effect. If you show them videos of chimps that they have never seen before, who are strangers, they don't show that effect.
Similar studies have been done on humans. And in those studies, researchers saw the same thing as what Dewall saw in the chimps.
If a person stands next to a stranger who yawns, they're unaffected usually. They stand next to their wife who yawns, they're going to be yawning themselves.
In all his years studying empathy in animals, there's one memory in particular that stands out for Franz Dewall. There was a male chimp named Amos who was living at the Primate Research Center in Georgia where Dewall works. Amos was really sick. Dewall separated Amos from the rest of the group, but he kept the door to his area half open.
So the other chimps, they could reach in and they could touch him, but they could not get in there, and he could not get out of there.
Some of the other chimps started grooming Amos through the opening.
And he would be sitting there panting heavily. But there was also a female who would bring straw to him. So he had a nest, and so she added straw to the nest. And she even would put it behind his back, a bit like what humans do in a hospital, where they put pillows behind a patient in the hospital to make them more comfortable. This female was putting straw behind him to make him probably feel more comfortable.
Dewall says that over his many years of research, he's seen chimps and bonobos go so far as to take the perspective of somebody else.
It's more than just a consolation response of calming behavior aimed at a distressed party, but also some understanding of their situation. And that shows a bit more of the complexity, very similar to human empathy.
As humans, we can take our empathy for granted. Now, Dewall is looking to see if empathy can be observed in other kinds of creatures, like creatures of the cold-blooded variety.
The thing is that I usually assume that empathy is a mammalian mechanism, which all the mammals have. But it's not limited probably to the mammals. That's the issue, is that we have quite a bit of evidence for birds. And if birds and mammals have empathy, then you're going to look at some common ancestor like the reptiles.
Dewall thinks the capacity for empathy may go hand in hand with parental care.
Parental care requires mechanisms of being sensitive to the emotional state of somebody else. And so all species with parental care, and some reptiles have that, may have that mechanism.
Dewall suspects that researchers will find that more creatures have empathy than we originally thought.
In all the studies that we do on animals, we always find that everything we observe is older than we think. And I think the same thing is going to happen with empathy. Is for the moment, we think it's a mammalian thing, but it may be actually more widespread than that.
Right now, Dewall is on the hunt for empathy in yet another animal, fish. For Origin Stories, I'm Nancy Rosenbaum.
And I'm Meredith Johnson. Frans de Waal is the C.H. Candler Professor of Psychology at Emory University, where he also directs the Living Links Center for the Advanced Study of Ape and Human Evolution. He's the author of several books, including The Age of Empathy, and most recently, Are We Smart Enough to Know How Smart Animals Are? This episode was produced as part of the Being Human initiative, a joint project of the Leakey Foundation and the Bauman Foundation, dedicated to understanding modern life from an evolutionary perspective. The Being Human initiative is all about why we experience our lives the way we do, including our thoughts, feelings, and behavior. And so, we're bringing you the Being Human bonus segment, where we talk about how the science in this episode applies to real-world situations. Today's guest is Natalie Hansen.
It was a little mind-blowing to listen to the episode and to have these behaviors described in the animal world and go, I see that in my classroom all the time.
Natalie's a special education teacher in Northern California. She found lots of connections between Frans de Waal's work on empathy and her own work.
This bonobo that's screaming for 3 minutes, oh, that's my kid who went and hid in the closet and rubbed his ears for a minute because that's how he needed to regulate. It's not a typical behavior, but it serves a purpose. And I started writing like behavior management plans for these bonobos.
Natalie works with middle school kids who have emotional and behavioral disabilities, and empathy is super important in her classroom.
Empathy is one of the number one things that I think about on a daily basis in the work that I do. Empathy is sort of everything when you're trying to create a safe classroom in which students are able to learn because they feel understood or they feel like someone's actually trying to help them, that they don't feel alone, they are not scared to take risks. And empathy is huge in that because students want to feel like their emotions and their place is understood. And they expect empathy from other people. And what gets hard is if you're in a room full of everyone who's expecting empathy from everyone else, but they're not necessarily giving it, that can cause some friction.
Most of the kids Natalie works with have significant disabilities that make it hard for them to understand feelings. And like the orphaned or traumatized bonobos Frans de Waal mentioned in our story, many of the students have had significant trauma in their early childhood. This makes it really hard for the kids to regulate their own emotions, and it can impact their ability to be empathetic.
So in the episode, it was mentioned how bonobos who had experienced trauma, they're more inclined to scream for longer, and they have difficulty sort of coming down from whatever triggered them to start screaming. They need more time and maybe a different approach to help them get back to being okay. I thought his analysis of that was spot on. When I see kids that have experienced trauma, what happens is it creates a trigger for them, something that reminds them of that trauma, or even in a lot of cases forces them to sort of relive that trauma. And then we see their behavior change, and that can look like becoming extremely withdrawn, hiding, running away, becoming physically or verbally aggressive because they can't really deal with that emotion. And most of the times they can't even really name what they're feeling, and they can't necessarily describe what they're feeling. And they need someone else to come in and sort of help them regulate because they don't know how to do it for themselves.
But one thing that's different about being human is that we can learn to regulate our feelings, and we can work to build our empathy skills. This is what Natalie does with her students every day. Natalie says the place she starts when teaching the skill of empathy is teaching the kids to recognize their own emotions, to build up a vocabulary for their feelings.
So getting kids to identify, oh, when I'm sad, my stomach hurts. Or if my stomach hurts, maybe I'm feeling sad, or maybe I'm feeling this way. Like just giving them the words so that they can talk about what they're feeling. And then also helping them pause. Okay, I see your leg is a little agitated. How are you feeling right now? Oh, I'm a little nervous because you're about to give us a quiz. Okay, that's good. So you're feeling nervous. How can we help calm that for you? And step by step, helping them go through that process.
The next step is learning to see another person's perspective. Like, for instance, if a student gets mad in class and throws their book across the room.
How do you think that's making other people feel? And really start on that perspective taking. And as a group, we can talk about it. If the book hit the wall of the classroom next door, what do you think those kids are feeling? How about the kid right next to where the book landed? How do you think he's feeling? Do you think he feels safe in the classroom?
You can't read another person's mind and really know how they're feeling, especially when recognizing emotions is a skill you're still working on. But one of the building blocks to being empathetic is learning to recognize cues that can give clues to other people's feelings.
Oh, they have a frown on their face. Maybe they're sad or they're upset about something. Oh, that person's crying. Something might have happened to them. Do you want to see if they're okay? Or that person is smiling and jumping up and down. They must have got some really good news. Maybe they want to share it with you.
The hope is, from there, the kids are on their way to taking another person's perspective, to making the connection between their own actions and how those actions make someone else feel.
The perspective taking piece is always really, really tricky because especially in middle school when things are about belonging and identity and you get so focused on yourself when you're going through all this adolescent stuff. It's already hard at that point, and then you add a trauma or a disability on top of that. My heart just breaks for these kids, and it's tough, but I've seen successes and I know that it can be done. And that's what tells me that empathy truly is an ability and a skill. It's not just something you have or you don't.
And even if you think you have these skills down, empathy is something we all need to pay attention to.
So I think being able to understand that emotions and abilities such as empathy are vital to community building, whether you're a human or a chimp or a bird or whatever sort of animal. But it's key to community, which is key to survival, in my opinion. If we want to continue as a pretty successful species, we're going to need to be able to build empathetic communities and strong community ties and be able to rely on each other and feel comfortable enough with each other. Console each other when we're upset, celebrate with each other when something good happens. If we want to keep going in a good direction, empathy is going to be a very, very key thing.
Thank you so much, Natalie.
No problem. I enjoyed this.
And thank you for listening to the Being Human bonus. Origin Stories is a project of the Leakey Foundation. The Leakey Foundation advances human origins research and offers educational opportunities to cultivate a deeper, collective understanding of what it means to be human. We give research grants to scientists and share their groundbreaking discoveries through our podcast, website, and lecture programs. We also give scholarships to students from developing countries to attend field schools and earn advanced degrees. We're in the final week of our fundraising challenge, and we are so close to meeting our goal. If you've ever considered a donation, now is the time. A generous sponsor has offered to match every donation dollar for dollar, up to $1 million. You can help the Leakey Foundation fund important scientific research and outreach programs like this podcast by making a tax-deductible donation to the Leakey Foundation. Visit leakeyfoundation.org/donate before August 31st, and your donation will be doubled. That's LEAKEY foundation.org. Origin Stories is sponsored by Adept Word Management, Intelligent Transcripts. Visit them for all of your transcription needs at adeptwordmanagement.com. You can find transcripts of all our past episodes at leakeyfoundation.org. This episode was produced by Nancy Rosenbaum. Our editor is Audrey Quinn. Special thanks to Natalie Hansen and Rich Halton. Our theme music is by Henry Nagel. Additional music by Boxcat Records and Poddington Bear. I want to say a special thank you to all of you who have rated and reviewed Origin Stories on iTunes. It means a lot to us, and it really helps people find the show. So if you like the show, tell your friends about us and write us a review.